Thanks for everyone for taking the time to join today's Q&A session. I'm very happy to have you. We have a lot of material that we've prepared for you. As always, if you have a question during the event, please use the chat function at the bottom of the Zoom. And if you could please direct your messages to my colleague, Karen Bray. Karen, give a wave. She'll be able to see them better than I will as I'm walking through some of the materials we prepared from the information that came in through the registration. We've had a lot of development, a lot of exciting development since the last time we've met, and very happy to go through that with you. We've had some very good drill results that are very promising. We're learning a lot more about our projects in Jamaica, as well as we've closed on, as you will all know, we've closed on a financing that was oversubscribed and upsized. So we're well funded to continue what we're doing. Maybe without further ado, I'll share my screen and we'll get to it. I apologize in advance. I won't be looking head on at you because I'll be looking at my larger screen where the presentation materials are. But hopefully we can make this work. Karen, are you seeing this? Is everyone seeing this screen?
I am. I can see that.
Okay, great. Well, just to remind everyone today, I will be making forward-looking statements based on the best information that we have available and data that we have available today. So we'll get to it. We had a lot of people ask us, and some people, when they register, they want to ask questions, but they indicate with time zones, particularly the Australian time zone, that it's difficult to attend. But we did have a lot of participants asking that want to be able to hear through the replay. That this, as always, we'll post this to our website within a couple of days post this event. We had a lot of people asking that in our latest drill results from Provost, which is one of the porphyry targets within our Bellas Gate project, that we talked about. This was the first drill hole to transition through the various zones of a classic porphyry deposit, and wanting to understand and maybe a little education of what that means. So just to frame it for everybody, you'll remember, if you look at the bottom left here, this is the island of Jamaica and where our main blocks are. We're right in the center of the island. We are focused primarily right now with our drilling. We're doing exploration in other areas from a surface perspective, but we're focused primarily with our drilling in the Bellas Gate area, which is over here, where 12 of the 16 porphyry targets that we've identified are located. Over this 30-kilometer strike extent, we've identified 16 porphyry and 40 epithermal prospects through the work that we've done. If we zoom in on Bellas Gate, just to give you an idea of how we derive these targets, we look at things like soil geochemistry. So at Bellas Gate, you're seeing right now over 10 kilometers of continuous copper in soils, and anywhere we see that magenta color is over 300 ppm copper in soil, so very, very high grade. And then geologists also look for things called, we call ring faults. So if you think about, you have older rocks sitting on the surface and going down at depth, and then you have younger intrusions coming up where that fluid comes up. It comes up and it forms in the shape. These porphyry deposits are often looks like cylinders as it's pushing against those older rocks. So these ring faults are very, very important as one indicator of a deposit. So we've been focused primarily, if we look at Bellas Gate and look at these targets, we're focusing over this 4-kilometer area on what we call the Camel Belt, and we've been drilling primarily at our Provost target to the northwest side of the Camel Belt, and then our Camel Hill target that's down to the southeast. When we zoom in on Provost, where we just announced the recent drill results that people are asking about, you can see what these ring faults look like. This is a very large area where, again, it looks like you had an intrusion come up and push through the older set of rocks, and that's why that helps us identify what the shape of the deposit may be. when we zoom in and look at Provost on a plan view, so this is a bird's eye view looking down at it. We've drilled, we've been primarily focused on this window that you see here, which is 900 meters by 200-meter area. If you take that down to 400 meters vertical depth, we now drill holes deeper than that, but even if we just cut it off at 400 meters, that makes a 200 million ton volume of rock, or 200 million ton exploration target. But we're still wide open up here to the northwest. You can see all these dots. These indicate strong copper and soil with no drilling in this area. You can see all this yellow that's underneath. This is the alteration, or the altered rock that we see in the area that's been altered by fluid coming up. And then very importantly, this gray that you see here, this is a volcanic conglomerate that looks like it could possibly be millions of years ago, a mud flow off the side of an old volcano. And it's very important at Provost because what it's done is it's capped this system, which means there's been very little erosion, and it looks like the whole system is intact. We're yet to test underneath of this, but it looks like, based on the alteration in the soil geochemistry with what we're seeing, that this could potentially be open underneath of this as well. And that's made part of the Provost target, and the majority of the Provost target, a blind target. We're starting with the areas where we can see it from surface, and then we'll move into more of these unknown areas. But when we look at this as a 200 million ton volume of rock exploration target, the question is then, what's the grade? And if these other areas where it's open come in, where what we see from surface and with soil geochemistry look good, I mean, this has potential to be north of a 500 million ton exploration target for us as we continue to step out. Just to recap what we've done at Provost, this hole here, PVT 0900-02, this was the one that we announced in September that got the market's interest, 391 meters, 0.5% copper equivalent. And then that included 280 meters of 0.6% copper equivalent. You can see how that grade, you can see them going from the orange colors to the reds and the magentas. So the grade of it was picking up as we were going down deeper. And we'll talk through that when we talk about the zones of these porphyries. Another hole that we had announced, you can at Provost, the purple is the intrusive, it's the diorite rock, and the green rocks are the volcanic. So the purple is the younger rocks that have come up with the fluid, and the green, well, it's mineralized, it's just in the wall rock that was already existing. And you can see that we were just drilling through tickling the tops of it with this 03 hole that we drilled and announced. And then we really started getting into good mineralization in the last 112 meters. And then unfortunately, we lost the hole, but the final 1.1 meters assayed 1.27% copper and over 4,000 grams per ton silver. 4,000 grams per ton silver, if we look at an 85-to-1 silver gold ratio, that's the equivalent of a 48 gram per ton gold hit. So very important. We've also learned through some of these holes, and several of them, we're seeing this over here. When we look at this rock slab, this is a really good example where you see a classic porphyry vein coming through, and then it continues on the other side. There's chalcopyrite in the center line, and the black along the salvages, that's the magnetite. That's a key feature that we look for with our geophysics when we look at magnetics. But then you can see this white epithermal quartz vein ripping through, and it cuts the porphyry veins, which means it came later. So what we think's happened is we have a multi-pulse system, which is good, because every time you see these epithermal veins, the grade doubles. This 3-meter sample was 1.24% copper equivalent. And what that means is you would have had the intrusive come up, and then the system closes, and then at some point there's another earthquake over a period of, the age dating shows that these intrusives are 75 to 80 million years ago, and they're intruding rocks that are 100+ million years ago. So when they come up, when there's another earthquake event and the system opens up and more fluid comes up, then you see epithermal veins overprinting the existing porphyry that's there, and just brings more mineralization forward and up here. So this is the hole that led to some questions that I'm about to answer. And sorry to take so long to frame it for you. Just want to give you some of the background in case there's some new listeners that aren't as up to speed on the story. You can see this, what we call lahar, or that's the volcanic mud flow, we believe, off the side of a volcano that's covered the system. We drilled this hole, PVT 0825001, and we drilled that down into this. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the core of the system where we know the grade should really spike, and we should see much higher copper gold grades when we get into the core of the system. And that's really based on temperature. We'll talk to that in a minute, but this hole that we just announced just 2 weeks ago today, and quite frankly, I was disappointed and a little surprised we didn't see a better market reaction from it, because it just means we need to do a better job educating the market, because it was a very good hole that means a lot, and that's what we'll talk to today when we talk about the different zones of a porphyry. But we hit 281 meters of 0.5% copper equivalent, and then you can see towards the end of the hole, we had another 62 meters of where the grade really started picking up at 0.77 copper equivalent. So why this is important, that was the first hole that went through all the zones of and just touched the final zone of a porphyry system. So I'm a finance guy. I always want to explain geology as simple as possible, so I like to use analogies. You know, when we think about these porphyry systems, one way to think about them is like a hard-boiled egg, where you have a shell, you have a white, and you have a yolk. When we think about porphyries, different minerals deposit at different temperatures. So as that fluid comes up, the sulfide minerals, as they get further away, pyrite deposits at a cooler temperature, at a medium temperature, which would be the white part of our hard-boiled egg, would be chalcopyrite dominant, which is a copper sulfide mineral that contains about 1/3 copper within chalcopyrite mineral. And then the core of the system, or the yolk of the hard-boiled egg, is the hot temperature of the system, and that is 2/3 copper sulfide. So when we think about bornite and we think about the grade potential, that's what we're trying to find. And this is what gets us so excited when we're seeing, you know, 0.4 copper, 0.2 gold. We're seeing a lot of that in that transition zone between what we call the pyrite shell and getting into the chalcopyrite zone. Because unlike a hard-boiled egg, it's not a clean transition. When we look at it more, looking from what a geologic model would look like, you can see you have the shell in here in the gray. That's the pyrite shell. And in this area, we'll see it will start where you have 10% pyrite and, you know, 0.5%, 1% chalcopyrite. And it's not again, unlike an egg, it's not a clear-cut transition. It slowly transitions. So you'll see that the pyrites start to decrease and the chalcopyrites start to increase as you're getting closer to the core of the system. So when we move in and get closer, you can see as we're exiting the pyrite shell, now we're 5% pyrite and 1 to 2% chalcopyrite. And then when we get, we actually see in this drill hole is really important because the ratio actually flipped for the first time, where we saw more chalcopyrite than pyrite. So we were on a 2-to-1 ratio, chalcopyrite to pyrite. And then very importantly, we may have clipped the top of the bornite core of the system. There's two explanations, because it's the first time we saw bornite, which is a higher grade sulfide mineral. And it's very important. So there's two explanations. Either we've clipped the top of the system, as you can see with as an illustration here, a drill hole coming down and just clipping the top of this bornite portion, and then going back into chalcopyrite, or that bornite's come in up through a vent, or a high sulfidation vent. But either way, the positive thing is it's down there somewhere. So we're drilling right now. We've just moved our large capacity contract rig up to follow up on the hole that we drilled with our man portable rig that we purchased. We're very happy with the performance of the man portable rig. It was rated for 400 meters when we bought it. This hole that we just drilled was 597 meters, so almost 50% increase over its nameplate capacity. A real testament to the team and their capability. But now we're going to drive a hole down below this one that we've just drilled and see if we can really get into the guts of the system, into the bornite core. Because when we look at this, these are just an illustration of what the rock looks like, and we look at the grades. When we start where we see that kind of 10-to-1 pyrite to chalcopyrite in the pyrite shell of the porphyry, you can see this is what we call smoke. We're not in it yet, but we know that we're getting close, where you get below ore grade mineralization, 0.14 copper, 0.04 gold, about 0.17 copper equivalent. But this is what the rock looks like. And then when we start getting into the chalcopyrite zone of the porphyry, this is where the grade starts picking up. So this particular 3-meter sample, 0.9% copper, 0.4 gold, 1.17% copper equivalent. And then where we saw bornite, and this is why we're after it, and this is why we're so focused on trying to find the core of the system, because this is the grade potential, where it looks like we may have clipped that. We got 1.14% copper and 1.2 grams per ton gold, which is almost 2% copper equivalent, which is very easily economic block cave type or sublevel cave underground material. So what we're looking for at all of these porphyry targets that we're evaluating in Jamaica, we have lots of them. It's about finding the most fertile, and we're looking for anything above 0.5% copper equivalent from a open pittable perspective, and anything above 0.8% copper equivalent from an underground perspective. And for some of you who may not be so versed in, well, what makes it, what's an economic grade, the average operating mines today are operating about 0.53, while the average copper development projects are 0.39, and we're drilling into a lot of 0.5 to 0.7 type copper equivalent grades. So we're in line with the operating mines today and well above the average on development projects. And I like to look at the GT Gold Saddle deposit just as an example from a grade perspective. They had a little less copper and a little bit more gold, but on an apples to apples copper equivalent calculation, it's very much in line with what we're seeing at Provost, just over 0.5% copper equivalent. And this is a deposit that was acquired by Newmont 2 years ago for 420 million Canadian, or just over 300 million US. And, when we think about Provost, this is just one of 16 targets we have. Provost sits here within Bella's Gate. So that's the sort of value potential we're talking about. Now, I'm not saying all of them are going to be that size and that grade profile. This is why we need to test them and see which are the most fertile and go from there. But Provost right now is certainly shaping up to be, at least initially, a very, very strong target for us. So hopefully with that explanation on the different zones of the porphyry, that's why we're so focused on trying to locate the heat part of the system, or the heat engine, or the bornite core, because that grade, just based on mathematics and science, bornite's about double the grade of chalcopyrite. So when we get into it, we know that we'll see the grade really pop. Another question that multiple people had asked us was, with so many targets in Jamaica, how do we prioritize and focus on where to drill? And that's a really good question, because it is something that we're constantly rating and ranking where to make our investment. And so far, it's early days still for us, but so far, where we have these 4 ingredients, every time we're drilling into where we have these 4 ingredients, we're drilling into strong copper mineralization. And those ingredients are, when we look at the soil geochemistry, if we have strong copper mineralization in the soil, if we have strong selenium in the soil, which is often an indicator mineral for porphyry deposits. Then we think about geophysics, if we have a strong magnetic high signature because of the magnetite involved in the rock that will show up through magnetic geophysics. And then if we have a chargeability high when we run IP surveys, because sulfide minerals will hold a charge. Anytime we have 4 of these together to date, we're drilling into strong copper mineralization. So when we look at the Bella's Gate block, where we're focused over this 4 kilometers, Provost would be sitting up in this area between this top blue line and this second blue line, and Camel Hill is down near this bottom blue line. This is 4 kilometer area between here, and this is where we're drilling today, because this is where we have the all 4 ingredients. We have all the data collected for these 4. One of the things we're doing right now, if we go north of Bella's Gate up into our Arthur's Seat concession, we are currently right now in real time collecting all the soil geochemistry data to run that analysis. And then we have planned down to the south. We have the soil, we have the magnetics, but we don't have the IP survey done. So these yellow lines that you see here, these are planned for the second quarter of 2024. It's going to be part of our 2024 program. And we'll get all the ingredients that we need to give ourselves the best chance of success, because as a little small exploration company, what we don't want to do is just be running around poking scout holes all over the place, because drilling is the most expensive thing that we can do. And we want to make sure when we're making the investment in drilling a hole, we're not going to hit every hole. That's just exploration. But we want to make sure when we are drilling that we have the best possible chance of success when we're making those investment dollars. So this is part of the program that we're going to be running in 2024. And if we think about this area to the south of Camel Hill, this is down here where we see the largest by far copper and soil anomaly. So this is 2.5 kilometers by 2.5 kilometers. We don't have any IP yet here, but we have strong magnetics. We have good selenium in soil, and we have good copper in soil. And the geologists would, they'd love to come and drill an area like this. But when we see 2.5 kilometers by 2.5 kilometers, you could easily poke 6, 12, 10, 12 holes and miss the main intrusive body that you're looking for, because it's under there somewhere. We have a degree of confidence in that when we see this much copper and this high grade copper in the soil. But locating exactly where it is, we want to get that IP run, and then this will become a drill ready target for the second half of next year. But we don't think that it stops here. If we just extend these Connors and Camel's belts up into this Arthur's Seat block, this is why we're collecting the soil data up in this area right now, and we're going to be running the IP up here next year in the second quarter as well. Because when we look at Arthur's Seat, this is a discovery that we made last year, so it's still relatively recent. You can see we have this 8 kilometer by 4.5 kilometer area. Every magenta triangle you see here is a sample of rock that we've taken from surface that's graded over 1% copper, and I think up to 16.5% copper. And then if we look at the vein swarm here on the southeast portion, switching from copper to gold, we sampled all up and down these veins, and we got above 2 grams per ton in multiple samples all over these veins from surface. And this is a 15 square kilometer area, so that got us pretty excited. We did poke a couple scout holes into this, and we were disappointed with the results because it was low grade. But what it told us was we saw the right type of alteration, paraphyllite alteration, which is more porphyry type alteration. And we saw a little bit in one of the samples, a little bit of that bornite mineral that's got to come up from somewhere. And it's been taken from the heat part of the system and ripped up in part of these veins. And it's very common to have epithermal veins associated with these large porphyry deposits. So if you think about that magma coming up and that fluid coming up and forming the main deposit, and that's what we're after. But as that fluid comes up, it races and it finds the cracks and the crevices. So it's very common on top of porphyry deposits or on the shoulders of them to have epithermal veins. Now, in some cases where it doesn't happen as often anymore because we found a lot of the outcropping porphyries, but when you do see an outcropping porphyry, in a lot of cases, all that means is you've had a level of erosion where those epithermal veins are gone and they're eroded off. But here, these are all intact. All these red lines you see are veins. And when we see 2 magnetic features that are isolated like this, with drilling showing paraphyllite porphyry style alteration, with the bornite as a copper sulfide mineral coming up in one of these drill holes, this is a heck of a target for us as well. So that's why we're going to run the IP here as well. So that's how we prioritize our targets. When we have so many, it's about collecting as much data as possible before we commit to drilling. And as we get all that data, then you constantly rate and rank and say, okay, what's the best way to move towards a resource and test these and find the most fertile of these porphyry deposits, because it sure does look like we have a lot of them here in Jamaica. One of the other questions we had come in was talking about our big rig. So we have a larger capacity contract rig as well as the smaller man portable rig that we own is C3 Metals. The contract rig's currently drilling at Camel Hill. Can we comment on how it's performing there? So thank you for that question. When we think about Camel Hill, it sits down here. We were just talking about Provost, which is up in the northeast side of this Camel Belt within Bella's Gate. And if we look 4 kilometers going down to Camel Hill, this blue line, if we were to look at it on the side, like a slice in the earth, so we look at a long section or a slice of it, as if we were under the ground looking at it, this is what the magnetic geophysics look like. You can see Provost sitting here. You can see where there's been limited historical drilling. We haven't drilled here yet, an area called Geo Hill that has nice hypotheses. And then you look at the size of what Camel Hill looks like. It looks very big. All previous historical drilling averaged 225 meters, and 40% of those holes ended in over 0.5% copper equivalent. So that's what really sparked our interest with this project. You have this area here between Geo Hill and Provost. We actually just think we may have made a discovery. I mean, it showed up in the magnetics here, but we hadn't, there's been zero work done here, and we just actually put in a dirt road cutting from Geo Hill over to Provost, as we've actually put in a road to get from Camel to Provost all the way along. And up on the surface here, you can see the surface topography as we cut in that road, and you have the road cuts on the side, just covered in quartz stockworks and sheeted veining. So it's running about 300 meters now from surface. So that's a target. We're starting to sample that and send it in, and we'll see what if we can develop another target here. It might be the 17th porphyry target that we have. But speaking of Camel Hill, when we look at the size potential of it compared to some of the others, it does look quite big, but it's also a bit of a mystery to us, because you have this area in the middle, you can see here, it shows up in the magnetics, that looks like it may be barren, and what's going on there. So we look at it from a bird's eye view at Camel Hill. Again, this is another 200 million ton plus type exploration target. I think we've drilled 3 or 4 holes at Camel now. We've announced the first one. We have some other assays pending that should be coming in here shortly. The first one that we announced, 208 meters of 0.57% copper equivalent, only 22 meters downhole. And that included 135 meters of 0.71, so very high grade mineralization near surface. But what we see at Camel is really interesting. Both the green, which is the older volcanic rocks, the andesites, as well as the purple is which is the younger intrusive, which should hold the bulk of the higher grade mineralization. Both of them are mineralized, and we actually are seeing higher grades in some cases in the wall rock and the andesites in the green. And the question is, well, why is that? And we think what's happened here, because as you can see with some of these historic holes, these holes were vertical and they're drilled with BQ core. So we had no choice under 43-1. We have to go and follow up on them with a wider core slice. And this is what this hole confirmed for us. But you get into really good grade, and then the grade seems to drop out. But then we know as we get down deeper, we get back into good grade. And again, we think this is a multi-pulse system, whereas that system open and closes with seismic events, and it comes, and that fluid comes and pulses up. We think what may have happened at Camel, and part of our working theory is as that secondary system came up, it actually pushed up and remobilized some of the initial copper up into this upper area. And that's why so good news, we have high grade copper near surface, which bodes well for open pit extraction. But then you're going to have to go through an area zone. It looks like you have a second pyrite shell. So it looks like you have one porphyry on top of another, and you have a second pyrite shell. And we have to go through that pyrite zone again to get into the chalcopyrite. Because when and the other important thing we learned with this drill hole at Camel as we got into it, this wasn't mineralized, but we found a diatreme breccia. Now, these diatreme breccias, this is like the steam and the gas coming up when that fluid's coming up, and it's coming up along the sides and shoulders of these porphyry deposits. When we think about, we often compare things back to Grasberg, because Steve Hughes, our VP exploration, as well as Paul Warren, one of the senior geologists we have working with us on this project, they both worked for years at Grasberg. And Grasberg has diatreme breccias on the shoulders on either side. So they are important units, and they grab and they rip up fragments, and you can learn a lot from the fragments coming up in them. And what one of the fragments we see, if we look at the top, you can see this fragment here, and we zoom in on it. This is very, very vuggy fragment. It looks like a high sulfidation residual fragment, which means there's likely a target somewhere at depth for very high grade on the precious metal side, with some copper as well. So something to follow up on. But just getting back to that hard-boiled egg analogy, if you had one porphyry sitting on top of another, which is common, it does happen. People think these porphyries are static, but they're not, especially when they're millions and millions and millions of years old, and there's been multiple seismic events to allow that fluid to come up. You can end up with multiple pyrite shells, and it looks like that's what we have at Camel, where the first one maybe eroded off or had copper remobilized as the second one pushed it up into that upper portion, and then we have to go through another pyrite shell and down to get into the guts of the system. And we have evidence for these multiple pyrite shells at Camel Hill, because when we look at a couple holes, these were drilled last year. So these were drilled last year in November. We announced them last year. You can see we hit right near surface. Again, good grades from surface, so 0.4, 0.16 copper, gold with a little bit of sniff of silver. We had another hole here, 108 meters, 0.42, 0.26 in porphyry style mineralization right at surface. But then you go through this area where it's mineralized, but it's weakly mineralized, where that ratio of pyrite again jumps to 10 to 1, and then you have to see it decrease to 5 to 1 and lower before it's a chalcopyrite before you start seeing the good grade. But then as we got down deeper, then the grade started really picking up. You see 0.6 copper. You see the overprinting epithermal veins. Again, those are more evidence of a secondary system coming up and underneath, where you have narrower veins, 1.3 meters of 4.6% copper and 82 grams silver. Go back into the porphyry, 0.35 copper, and then more epithermal veins overprinting, 0.2 copper, 0.4 gold. So we're learning a lot about Camel. It looks like a big target, and it looks like it could be one porphyry sitting on top of the other, and that's what we're trying to determine with some of the drilling going on there now. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what's going on at Camel Hill, and what as we're learning more about it as we get some more holes into it. One of the other questions that we had come in was from Rolf in Germany. Rolf, thanks for joining us today. Was asking, will we have additional man-portable rigs in Jamaica? And if yes, how many and when? So I can understand why you would be excited for us to bring more of these in. It's been looks like it's been a smart investment for us. We were trying to figure out ways to inexpensively test the upper portions of these systems before we make the investment in drilling deeper holes. We know we're going to need to drill deeper into these systems, but again, because drilling's the most expensive thing that we can do, it's how do we manage these dollars wisely. And this rig, now that we've gotten another hole 550 meters, we've gotten one close to 600. It was rated for 400 meters. We're getting great performance with it. Our direct drill cost is $40 to $50 Canadian per meter. And our all-in cost, if you think about the assays, the shipping, the core, the geologists, everything is between 150 to 200 Canadian per meter. And what that means is we're able to operate at 15 to 50% of the all-in drilling cost of the average drill contract. If you're in an established mining camp, your costs are lower, because then the contractors know that, well, if this project ends, I can just go down the road here. Or if you're in an isolated area like for instance, Northern Canada, I've seen these things up to and actually north of $1,000 all in Canadian per meter. for drill contracts, and we're able to do it inexpensively. So of course, it would make sense to bring in more of these. We do have a plan in place to make an order of another rig that we would bring in. We would make that. We're going to be making that order here very soon. It takes about 4 months now that we have this financing in hand. It takes about 4 months from the time we make an order. These are brand new machines. They're built. They're shipped from Indonesia. 4 months for it to get built, packaged up on a boat, and get it into Jamaica and clear customs. So we would expect to have that rig, the second one, up and operational in April in drilling. And also, we are going to look at our results between now and the end of March, and then contemplate, do we bring in another one in April, which would then take about 4 months from April to get in and get active. But we need to step into this based on results and make sure that we're doing this smartly and the proper way. So, but we do, Rolf, have a plan to bring in another one, and the goal is to have it turning by April. Gunnar from Vancouver has asked, when can we expect to see an inferred resource? And I'm going to assume that Gunnar's asking about an inferred resource in Jamaica, since we do have a measured, indicated, and inferred resource on the first skarn target that we have, Montana Cobra in Peru. We've already published that in May of this year. It really depends. It's a really tough question to answer, because if we spend 100% of our energy on a target like, say, Provost, and we bring in another drill rig and we say, okay, now we got 3 rigs turning and we're just going to attack Provost, it can move a lot faster. But then you're really putting all your eggs in one basket, and we need to let the data drive that, what we see from hole to hole, particularly with the amount of targets we have. So if we get onto one that just keeps getting better and better, and so far Provost is, from what we're seeing, but we'd like to get a couple deeper holes into it to confirm that, then you do, and you move, and you focus your majority of your energy on one very fertile system. But until we have that degree of confidence, we do spread it around a little bit. And it also helps our geo team analyze what we're seeing in real time and refine the model. So I think it's more capital dependent, and then time and allocating that capital where it goes than it is time. But realistically, I can't say yet because we don't have enough data, but my gut feel is we'll spend 2024 doing a bunch of drilling, and likely 20,000 meters of drilling in Jamaica in 2024. And then that will shape us up for an initial inferred resource sometime in 2025 is my gut sense. We could go faster than that if we decide to prioritize a certain area, if the results tell us that that's the right thing to do. So thank you for that question, Gunnar. Another question that we've had come in from Peter in Ottawa is, when do we expect to be back drilling in Peru? And do we expect to add more shareholder value from Jamaica or Peru? Peter, it's a tough, I'll answer the second question first. It's a tough question to answer because it depends on your time frame. And we just don't know as much in Jamaica today with the current team that's there. I know within the company, and any of you have known the company for a long period of time, with Carube Copper Corp, there's a different management team looking at this, and a different geology team looking at this, that had looked at and done the work here in the past. So sometimes a fresh set of eyes with different set of experience can really unlock the value from these assets. And when we look at what we're doing in Jamaica already, we're making great headway from some of the predecessors that were here. And in Peru, we have more work done there. We have a resource already. So today, you can more confidently say that you think you're going to have a mine in Peru than you can in Jamaica. But I would say the upside in Jamaica is also higher if we just think about blue sky upside, with the size of the package and the amount of porphyry type deposits and targets that we see along that 30-kilometer strike. So it's a tough question to answer. Where would you expect to add more value? Certainly in over the next 12 months, it'll be in Jamaica, clearly. But over the next 5 years, it's really tough to answer that question. In terms of when we expect to be back drilling in Peru, we still, Peru's been a challenging jurisdiction. We all know that. We've seen what's happened politically there. We know the timelines are long and it's slow to get the work done that you want to get done there. But we can't forget it's still the second largest producer of copper in the world. That accounts for 11% of global copper output, and a high percentage of the country's GDP is mining. So when we think about our package here, where we've picked up 30,000 hectares, we're just about 35 kilometers from Hudbay's Constancia and Pampacancha mines, 40 kilometers from MMG's Labumbas mine, First Quantum's Picara feasibility stage project. A little further to the southeast of Hudbay, you have Glencore operating down here. Barrick's come in and pick up some ground. BHP and Rio Tinto in the last 18-24 months have picked up a bunch of ground. Rio Tinto's been trying to grab everything between us and Las Bambas. So it is the right place to, Fresnillo here. It is the right place to be. It's just we need to be patient with things in the jurisdiction. We started with a small 5,700 hectare package, excuse me, and we increased it to over 30,000 hectares, or over 425% in 2 years. And the reason we did that is because we saw that there were two mineralized belts ripping through the property. On the eastern side, what we call the Jasperody belt, you have 28 kilometers where we've identified 13 skarn targets. We have only systematically drill tested the first one, where we put out our initial resource on Montana de Cobre. I'll talk to that in a moment. And then on the west side, you have multiple skarns, but you also have that rare outcropping porphyry that looks quite sizable. It's a kilometer by kilometer. It looks like a Las Bambas type target, and it's something that this is a very exciting target within the portfolio for the company, but we don't have a drill permit over here yet, and we're working towards that. We're working with the community, and we're working with the ministry to move that forward. Where we do have a drill permit is over on Montana de Cobre, and then you can see CVZ here. That's just to the north of Montana. That's Cresta Verde. That's the next skarn target. And to the south of Montana, you have Colon del Oro. We recently announced in September, we expanded our drill permit successfully. We increased it 74%, and now it covers all three of these skarns, and we can go after these. We're not going to be doing it today. We're investing those dollars, and we're making the decision to evaluate Jamaica. We really, as a little company, you have to say, where are we going to get our best bang for our buck? And if we look at across our portfolio today, our number one, if we just in terms of geology, because there's other things you have to think about from a community, government, those logistics, those sorts of things. But if we're just talking about geology, our number one target would be on the west side of our block in Peru, that Khaleesi target, where you have that outcropping porphyry. It's a kilometer by kilometer. It's right at surface. You can see it. It should be some low-hanging fruit in that area. Number two is exactly what we're doing in Jamaica right now, and that's where we're investing our dollars right now, our exploration dollars in Jamaica. And then number three would be the eastern side of the belt of the block in Peru. So when we rate and rank the best place to make the investment, we think Jamaica is it today, because of it just ranks higher than the eastern side of Peru, although we do have these now permitted for drilling, and we'll make sure that we maintain that in good standing. Montana de Cobre, all these skarns look like they're going to be 40 to 60 million-ish tons of material. Montana de Cobre came in 52 million tons measured and indicate 0.5% copper right at surface. Looks like it'll be less than a 1-to-1 strip ratio. So the idea has always been try and put 3 or 4 of these together, and then you have a sizable mine. But with the success we're having in Jamaica, we've shifted focus, and that's where we're going. We still really like Peru, because when we think about our geologic model, you can see this purple that you see here. This is a thrust fault. And when we think about those two belts on the eastern side and then the western side, what it looks like is the intrusive came up and the fluid came up, and it was violent, and it broke right through that thrust fault. And that's why you have that very large outcropping porphyry mineralization sitting right at surface on the western side of the property. And on the eastern side, it stalled and all that fluid shot up the thrust fault. And that's what's created that 28-kilometer belt with 13 skarns forming that we think are porphyry related. And we think there's a porphyry at depth here. But to target that, you're talking about drilling 700-meter holes. And we're doing that in Jamaica, but we can do it much less expensively in Jamaica than at 14,000 feet elevation in Peru, where you have to have a camp and you have to have all these things to service it. So part of it is just what is your cost for what you think you're going to be able to deliver. And today, from what we see and where with the ability to operate, Jamaica clearly is where we think we can deliver the most value in the near term. So hopefully that gives you an idea, Peter, of the value opportunity, both Jamaica and Peru. Peru, we see a lot of value to unlock. It's just going to take some time. In Jamaica, we think we can unlock some value here in the very near future, particularly if we rip off 20,000 meters of drilling here in 2024. So right now, our current strategy in Peru and our plan, we will maintain our 30,000 hectare concession in good standing. We're estimating that we'll reduce our burn rate by 50% year over year, continue to focus on community relations and drill permitting the key areas where we have the highest prospectivity. And then we'll look to evaluate what makes the most sense once we have those key areas permitted. Do we continue with 100% ownership of this? We have a lot of large companies in the area who have inquired on the project. They would agree, as we agree, that it probably makes the most sense for us as a small, nimble company in our team that's shown success in getting drill permits in hand in Peru, in southern Peru, to continue that work. But once we have those in hand, does it make sense to bring in a partner via an earn-in? If we end up at that time, we're pretty bullish on copper. Maybe, in the mid to long term, we're bullish on copper. Depending on the timing of that, does it make sense to potentially put it in a separate vehicle and dividend some shares to existing shareholders? So all that's to say that the property is highly strategic in the right area, and we just need to maintain our optionality, and we can determine the best way to unlock value once we get the key areas permitted for drilling. We had a question come in from Malcolm in Australia. Thanks, Malcolm, for taking the time. Malcolm states that we have arguably one of the best teams in the junior copper gold space. We can achieve a lot, but what do we see as our options for moving from discoverer to developer or a partner transaction, and how does this happen? Well, thank you for the compliment. We would agree, for a company of our size and scale, we have a very strong technical team, and that certainly can really help you lead to meaningful discovery. I think it's important to look at where we are and where we feel we are in terms of the life cycle of a junior mining company, or often referred to as the Lassonde curve. And it's depending on the project, but we think we're right here. When we think about Bella's Gate, we're right at the cusp of meaningful discovery, where we're drilling into porphyry mineralization that's overprinted by epithermal veins, where we're getting ore grade type mineralization in multiple drill holes, and then we just need to see how big these things are, and then you infill them, and then you move towards your feasibility study and your economic studies. But there are other areas that we have in Jamaica, like we talked about, that we'd be back here in that exploration stage. When you think, about running IP lines, doing your soil geochemistry work to identify and build up those targets. So it really depends on where you are, and it's more about capital than it is about time. When you talk about moving from a discoverer into a developer, I love the discovery phase. It's a high risk phase, but it's also the highest reward phase. It's the highest reward part of any part of this cycle if you get onto one and you get it right. And I've been fortunate in my career to be part of this in the past, and it really hooks you into wanting to be part of another one again. In terms of bringing in a partner, these are things that a strategic partner, whether that's a strategic investor on the equity level or a strategic partner at the asset level, these are things, this comes down to when we look at our business strategy. Step one is to set up the discovery stage where we've secured our district scale potential in multiple jurisdictions. We rate and rank our exploration targets. We secure the capital, fund these, and then we look to make meaningful discovery. And that's where we are right now. Step two is all about managing risk, and this is part of our business plan. And we do this constantly, where we think about the risk and reward and what's the most optimal return on investment. And that's why we've shifted our investment focus here over the last year from Peru into Jamaica, and it will continue more in Jamaica in 2024. And we want to create and maintain our optionality to maximize our portfolio. We get it shouldn't be lost on anyone, and it's quite common. I've spent the majority of my career in M&A in the mining space, and so we get calls all the time about our assets from larger companies. Everyone's looking for copper deposits out there, whether you're a diversified miner, a copper miner, or a precious metals miner. The precious metals guys are looking to add copper to their portfolio, and we've seen that through some of the majors have been publicly talking about that, as well as the intermediates are looking to gain exposure as well. So it really comes down to managing risk and saying, when's the right time? Do you do it? If you do it early, you can really eliminate competitive tension for down the road, and you can really be in a situation where you give up a lot too soon before you knew enough to know exactly what value to put on it. So we evaluate these things and we say, are we better to keep 100% moving ourselves today, or are we better to bring in a partner? And thus far, it makes a lot of sense for us to continue moving on our own. But there could be a point of time where it makes sense to bring in a partner. I think when we look at the size of the land package we have in Peru, and we look at the different timelines, at least currently, and these things can change, and we're starting to see some positive movement in Peru from the government level. But if under what we've seen recently, it's really, really difficult for a junior company, if we're just being frank with each other. I mean, it's very difficult for a junior company to move things forward because of the time that it takes. And this is why you see the BHPs and the Rio Tintos coming into the area aggressively, because they have the financial capability to say, this is the geology's here, we can be patient, we can wait on it. And it's hard for a company like C3 Metals, that the junior exploration model is we rely on the equity capital markets to fund our business. And if those equity capital markets aren't there, typically, not in all cases, because there are some long-term value investors out there, believe it or not, today, and we have a couple of them in our shareholder registry. But the majority of investors who invest in this space are seeking outsized returns in short period of time. And to go to people and say, look, it could be another year, it could be 2 years to get this key area permitted, just keep us going. It's not an attractive investment. People want to park that money somewhere else in the meantime, and then come back to it once those key permitted areas are in place. So there may be an opportunity there. We'll have to evaluate that as we go. But we always constantly look at what value do we think we can add ourselves versus on a risk-adjusted basis, bringing in a partner where you may be diluting at the asset level, but you can move something forward with a strong balance sheet behind you. One of the other questions we had was just a simple question about burn rate. Paul from London. Paul, thanks for asking the question. So our current plan that we're moving forward on here in 2024 will see us with a burn rate around 700 Canadian a month. We're bringing in, that includes the capital to bring in another drill rig. That includes capital. We're going to purchase a water truck in Jamaica right now, because some of these targets are 3.5 kilometers. You run the cost benefit analysis of pumping water versus having a water truck. It makes sense to have a water truck. It'll cost us about just under 150,000 Canadian for this water truck. But then over the course of 2024, we estimate it'll save us $220,000 making that capital investment, and that'll just continue as you go. So those are the sorts of investments that we always look at. We do cost benefit analysis of, does it make sense to make modest capital investments to lower our operating costs on a go forward basis? What's the payback of that? And we make that going forward, because we do have a permit to pull water from a river in Jamaica, so we can do that with our water truck that we're purchasing. So about 700,000 Canadian will be our burn rate, and that, we think we'll get 20,000 meters drilled, and we'll pick up another drill rig along the way. And then Tom has asked questions. Thanks, Tom, for joining. Tom's asked question, thoughts on Guyana and Venezuela. And Tom, because it's a good question with what we're seeing right now, with Venezuela certainly posturing to take part of Guyana. I don't know enough about it, and we're not C3's not. I probably know as much as you do, and you might know more than I do, Tom. I read what I read in the media, and because C3's not operating there, I don't have any great insight, and it would be reckless of me to speculate on opinion on that. So with that, those are the questions that we had come in today through the registration process. So we'd be happy now. Maybe Karen, is there any time for if there's any questions coming through the chat function that we should be asking?
There's one question.
Sure.
Also from Tom.
Okay.
Regarding Peru. And his question is, Dan, do you see streamlining for permitting for water, etc., leading to other progressive regulatory shifts?
So there was a positive development today, or not today, but just recently. And essentially what the ministry has allowed is, you used to have your environmental approvals in place and then go get your water permit. And it took about anywhere from 1 to 4 months, I'd say, to get the water permit in place. So now the governments, they are looking for ways to streamline the process. And that's positive. We heard a lot of positive rhetoric earlier in the year, and now we're actually starting to see a bit of action. So today, what's now in place is you can be pursuing both your water permit and your environmental permits in tandem. You don't have to wait for one to then apply for the next one, and that will cut out 1 to 4 months of permitting from a drill permit perspective.
I do have another last minute question that came into the chat from Tufio, and his question is a deep hole in Epidote Ridge still likely as part of this 8,500 meter campaign?
That's a really good question. Epidote Ridge is, as we've talked about before, it's something that we're very high on. It looks like it could be the center part of this whole system. When we think about the success that we've been having we just moved the drill rig. The rig was going to be drilling from Camel Hill to Epidote Ridge, and now the big rig that we need for Epidote Ridge, and now with the hole that we just saw at Provost, and we see bornite, and we see over a 1% copper, 1 gram per ton gold, and we see close to 2% copper equivalent, we really now want to get back into that area. So Epidote Ridge is something that looks really good from when we talk about those 4 ingredients, from a good soil geochemistry, good geophysics, but it is more it is more of a blind target, because there's zero drilling there, and you're drilling into a blind area. So it's about risk reward. It is something that we're going to get to. If I just pop up my screen here for a moment, you can see, so right now what we've done, we were drilling in this area down here around Camel. The plan was then to come up, and we wanted to test this area over here where you see this ring fault, and we want to test this area. Looks like a good area as well. But what we've done in the meantime, just with the success we're having up here, we've just moved that rig from here to here. We'll get a couple holes into this, and we'll evaluate when's the best time to move that with a third rig that we plan to have coming in April. That'll give us a lot more flexibility. And the reality, you know, when I see what we have in front of us, we have to be smart about capital, but we could be running 4 rigs right now, and doing a lot of what that's what the preference would be, but we have to, you know, make sure we have the right results to support that. So we're anxious to get into Epidote Ridge, but it has been deferred a little bit by what we're seeing now at Provost, just because there's known mineralization versus an anomaly that we're testing. And when we see those sorts of grades and that different zones of the porphyry, it makes a lot more sense to go and make that the priority target.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, so
That's great. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Happy holidays to everybody. Keep your eyes on what we're doing. Maybe I'll just make a quick comment for those of you who know about the upcoming share consolidation. We announced that when we announced the financing. That's hopefully taking place here in the next 2 weeks. It's taken longer than we would have liked. Shareholder approval's fine. We had shareholder approval back in March. The boards approved it, leading into the announcement that we made. We made the necessary submission to the Toronto Venture Exchange. They took a little while, as regulators sometimes do, to get to our file. And then they came back and they asked us for a report on our shareholder base that needs to come through Broadridge. It takes about a week to generate. That report should be in hand this week. That's the last thing we think we need to get this thing done. So we'll get through that. Consolidation, nice tight structure, lots of assay results coming out. Finish off this 8,500 meter program this year, and then move into what we hope to be 20,000 meters next year in Jamaica. So a lot going on. So thank you all. Really appreciate your time, and happy holidays to all.